Good morning and welcome back to Tactics Board, the first edition of the 2024-25 season, just over 24 hours away from Norwich City's championship campaign kicking off. They travel west to face Oxford United at the Kassam, and although it feels like it might be a fairly comfortable start to Johannes Hofftorup's time in the English second division, some of the tactical threats that they pose mean it could be a real challenge for the Danes system that he's trying to impose at Norwich and that they're trying to work on, and I'm going to tell you exactly why. But before that, I'm going to look at the starting 11 that I think Torup will choose. It's not really an easy one for me in the first game of the season, especially given the state of flux that the club has been in across most of the summer, but I'm going to give it my best go. So without further ado, here's the 11 I think Torup will choose to take to the Kassam. So I've gone for Angus Gunn in goal, Jack Stacey at right back, Grant Hanley, the captain, alongside Callum Doyle at centre-back, with Ben Krezene at left-back, Jakob Sorensen, Marcelino Nunez and Kenny McLean in the centre of midfield, with Jonathan Rowe on the right, Borja Sainz on the left and Josh Sargent on his own up front. I think a lot of that explains itself really, but the big debate for me is those three positions on the left of defence. I think Jack Stacey is fairly secure at right back, even though he hasn't had maybe the best pre-season. It might be a battle we see go on for much of the campaign with Kellen Fisher, but right now I think Torup will play it a little bit safer and go for Stacey in that right back position. And then the other three is where really it could be almost any combination. I think left back, we all know it's going to be either Krezene or Doyle, although Doyle obviously hasn't played as part of that Norwich system yet, not even in any of the pre-season games. So although they do feel he can apply the skill set he's shown at Manchester City and at Leicester in particular to this system, it would be a big show of faith to include him there. But I think he will at centre-back, because you look at some of the options available to them. Jose Cordoba doesn't look like someone Torup is completely confident can start tomorrow. And although he did say he looks fairly fit, he's only really played 15 minutes of pre-season for Norwich. And if it were me at this point, I'd play it a little bit safer with your marquee summer signing, especially going into what will be his first championship game. So I can see that panning out a little bit more slowly. And then you have a choice from Shane Duffy, Grant Hanley, Brad Hills, and Jayden Warner in terms of your more career centre-backs and players who have played there for a little bit longer. But I think any of those combinations really either goes for too much of that non-ball playing, more traditional profile, or it goes for somebody who's really inexperienced. And the way that Torup has talked about the sort of Hills-Warner shake-up, it still feels like one of those is likely to leave on loan. So I'd be surprised if he feels they're in the position to now start the opening game of the championship season, with Hills having never played in the Championship before and Jayden Warner only with a handful of games under his belt. Both finished the last season in League Two, of course. So that's worth bearing in mind. And then on that balance, I can see him going for a slightly more experienced option on the right. So for me, it's a choice between Grant Hanley and Shane Duffy. And although Shane Duffy probably has had the better season, there are two factors that I think are going in Hanley's favour. The fact, number one, that he's the captain, and to drop your captain for your very first competitive game would be quite the statement from Torup. Also, the fact that he has a little bit more pace than Duffy, and Torup has spoken about how important that pace is if you want to play a high line, if you want to press high, as he's spoken about and as his philosophy. And Duffy doesn't really give you that. So especially if they're going with Doyle on the left centre-back, which I've obviously spoken about and predicted, I think you do need a bit more pace in that role, and Hanley certainly provides that a little bit more than Duffy. And I'm going to come on to Oxford, but some of their strengths dictate that you do want to have a little bit of pace in that defence as well. That's something that Doyle struggles with, but he's also a little bit more adept at passing the ball out from the back. And again, that's something I'll cover, but it is something that's important against Oxford if they want to play in the same way that they did in League One. So I've gone for those two at centre-back. Then obviously if Doyle is in there, then you don't really have another choice than Ben Krezene, who I think still looks like he's getting up to speed. You have to remember he doesn't have too much experience at this level himself and is a little bit of a project for Norwich, if not a totally huge one and one that needs an overhaul. He's clearly a talented player, but I don't think he's quite there yet. I think he's still a little bit raw. But right now, if you're going to choose a left-footed centre-back, which Doyle is obviously the only option that Norwich have, then you're going to have him out there. And I think there is the level of trust that you can start him, even if I don't expect to see him as the first choice left back throughout the campaign. Then in midfield, there's a little bit of a debate because there is one who I've left out in Liam Gibbs. But I think the way that Norwich's pre-season has panned out, it looks like Torup has a little bit more faith in Sorensen over him. When things were going terribly against St. Pauli, obviously 3-0 down at half-time, he turned to Sorensen, who obviously was playing at centre-back, but rather than substituting him straight off, he took Liam Gibbs out of that midfield, put Sorensen into it, and then made the changes in defence. And it does feel like maybe right now he feels Sorensen is a little bit more ready to play in the system than Gibbs. It's not a terrible position for Gibbs to be in, the first reserve, compared to where he was last season, which was almost 4th, 5th choice striker. But right now, I think Sorensen maybe has a little bit more of that trust from Torup, and that's why I'm going for him ahead of Gibbs. I think the front five sort of explains itself. Kenny McLean, Marcelino Nunez, Borja Sainz, Jonathan Rowe, Josh Sargent. I don't think there's much reasonable competition for any of those players, even if this system is a little bit set up to feature Ono Hernandez a bit more and play to his strengths a bit more. I can't see him starting this game, and I think that is very much City's most talented five in those positions. And I'd be very surprised, to be honest, if that section of the prediction was proven wrong, even if I'm a little bit shaky on the rest of it. But to turn it around to Oxford and some of the strengths that they'll present, I've already teased you a little bit with some of the characteristics I think the defence will need, but a lot of that comes from the fact that they have been a high-pressing side under Des Buckingham. That was one of the first changes he made, really, after taking over from Liam Manning. Within a matter of a couple of months, they were topping the numbers in the League One charts for pressing, for high turnovers, for their effectiveness in that situation. And when you look at their formation, you can see how they managed to do that. They start with 3 high attackers, 1 striker in Ruben Rodriguez, and then the 2 wingers. It looks like it will be Przemysław Pocheta on one of those sides rather than Josh Murphy, who was obviously a very key player for them in getting up from the 3rd division. And then in midfield, they play with a deeper midfielder and 2 number 10s, which, I mean, you can see the drawbacks already for a promoted club trying to go with such an attacking midfield. But from a pressing point of view, that gives you so many players high up in the field, and it worked out really well for them last season. So it will be quite a significant test of Torup's principles, where there have been struggles throughout this pre-season with the St. Pauli game when they gave away a couple of goals like that. Especially, I think you saw the fact that these Norwich players are still getting used to playing that way after a slightly different setup under David Wagner, and it will be important that they manage to keep a cool head to pass through that setup, and especially in the sort of build-up of 3 players at the back that Torup likes. Of course, defensively, it won't look like that. Defensively, it will look slightly more like a back 4, but we know how he likes to build up with 1 inverted fullback, 2 centre-backs in there, and that back 3 is actually the sort of situation that Oxford loved to press last season. It's where they got a lot of their success against Bolton in the playoff final that obviously saw them up to the Championship, and that is where the problem for Norwich is. It's unlikely that Torup's going to change massively because of Oxford, and he said that actually at his pre-match press conference, that Norwich won't adapt too much to the opposition, but they will be aware of what they try to do. And the positive, of course, is that when you commit so significantly to the press and you have so many players high up in there, especially with the 2 number 10s in midfield, if Norwich can find a way round that press and they can do that well, then they've got plenty of space in behind, and they've probably got numerical advantages as well. And I don't know if Buckingham will want to adapt his system. Looking at the quality of players that Norwich have in those advanced areas, it could be a long afternoon for those Oxford defenders if Norwich do manage to get around that press. But if they don't, they will be in a pretty tricky situation. And Pocheta is somebody I wanted to touch on because I think he displays a lot of what Oxford are about. It's about pace in those front areas, not only because when they win the ball, they want to get players into advanced areas quickly, they want to break on you quickly, but also so that they can play those balls in behind. And although high pressing often matches up with possession football, and Oxford do like to control the ball where they can, they have previously looked a lot into those channels and finding the space in behind. Norwich are likely to leave a bit of that space in behind. So if they can get Poeta in those positions with the pace that Norwich fans know better than anyone he has, then that could be a danger. But of course, we all know that harnessing his ability tactically and technically has been an issue for him across his career. So a lot will be about how good the work Buckingham has been, how good the work Buckingham has done with him has been this summer. That was a mouthful. But if he has managed to get the best out of him, and if he has managed to get some clear tactical instructions across to Poeta, then I think that is definitely a situation to look out for, especially when you consider Rodriguez and the rest of the pace that Oxford have across that front line. So there are a few issues for Norwich to deal with. Again, as I said, it's a bit of a risk and reward game against Oxford, because if you can take that risk and if you can play around the press and keep cool heads even when they're coming onto you high up the pitch, then there is plenty of space in behind. And you look at the likes of Rowe and Sainth and Sargent, they will love to have that space in behind, and it could give a real opportunity for Norwich to go and exploit that on the first game of the season. Either way, tactically, it feels like it will go one way or the other. It will go fantastically for Norwich, or it will go disastrously, not to add to the tension going into the game. But I'm sure all of you will be hoping for the former, and of course, we'll have every twist and turn covered across our channels. So head to pinkun.com for more coverage across the weekend. Of course, we'll have build-up, live coverage of the game, and then analysis. And there's plenty across our social channels. And it's worth checking out pinkun.com/subscribe as well, so that you don't miss anything. Right, that's all my plugging done. Thank you for joining me for the first episode of Tactics Board of the season. Looking forward to seeing you again next week. Let's hope with quite a positive frame from hopefully 2 wins to start off the season for Norwich.